I'm Alisa Hathaway, and today I'm going to be interviewing Shruti Gandhi. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Let's just jump right into the first question. You remarkably started your own venture capitalist group, Array Ventures. Could you start off by telling us how you define venture capitalism?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share my journey in venture and also as an engineer and a founder before. How do I define venture capital? I think that's a good question. Um, Venture capital is a way to sell your company because there's a lot of other forms of capital out there that are less expensive. You're basically selling a part of your company in venture capital, and then the goal for that is to say, because of me doing that, I'm going to be able to grow faster and uh, have access to that capital that is risk free in many ways. So I don't have to pay it back unless things go well, which is a risk the investors are taking. But that is why they want access to the company and not give it in form of debt. So that's how I think about venture, and being able to be part of a lot of companies in a limited fashion, but also help them think about growth, is why I love what I do.
That was a really good answer. Thank you for sharing. Could you actually then talk a little bit more about your own trajectory? How did you end up launching Array Ventures?
I launched Array about 5 6 years ago. I was already in venture before that at a few other firms, and before that I was a founder and an engineer for another decade. um, my learning when I was a founder was to learn more about venture capital so I could understand how high growth companies work. um, and then when I decided to go start something again, potentially another company, often my founders came to me and said, we loved working with you, you went to bat for us, you are really involved in our company. um, and to me all those things just felt natural. You invest your money, you help out when you can. um, but that is often rare in many ways, or less likely, not because people don't want to help but because they don't know how to help. So I decided to start a firm where I thought I could go help companies and help them raise, but invest in areas that are areas I know well, which is enterprise data, AI, machine learning, and having that experience on the technical side, but also on the venture capital side, not just knowing why these areas are important, but how companies in these areas can grow fast is important. So that's what we help our companies think about. And that's why I started the fund with that mindset of helping companies get from the 0 to 1 to 10 journey. And we invest first check when the founders are just starting their companies, and we help them get to think through. We help them get to 1 million, and then think about how they get to 10 million ARR. And that's why I love what I do, because I keep doing that on repeat.
Yeah, so you briefly touched on this topic that you tend to look for companies about fields that you personally know more about. But what kinds of companies in specifically do most appeal to you to invest in, and like what particular qualities of a company do you look for when making an investment?
Yeah, I think for me, it's understanding the need and the pain point in an enterprise market. So I understand that well. I know what a large company of 500,000 employees, like where I worked at a company like IBM, would want something versus what 1,000 people company would want, right? I think the needs of an enterprise are something that I know well. And I also know technically what problems companies need to be solved, need solving. And so that's what I look for. And once I figure out a good team that is technically able to solve these problems with data, with AI, machine learning, computer vision, and many other areas, you guys are all experts in as well. Um, I go from there to help companies, founders then think about the growth trajectory, what I call the 0 to 1 to 10 journey. So just solving problems. My experience was when I was an engineer and a grad student and such, I thought everything could be a company. because you can just go solve it, you can go build it. But once I've been in venture long enough now, that's not true. My learning is it's more that you can solve problems, but that's not enough to go build large scale companies. You have to go solve business problems from there on to grow them and IPO the companies within 10 years or around that time frame. So that's the kind of stuff I look into, and also help our founders think about how they get from that 0 to 1 to 10 and then on 100+ million journey. Yeah.
So aside from the original idea, what do you think are the biggest factors of the success of a company, such as like the founder or team, technical execution, something else completely?
All these areas I find them to be very hard to be succinct around just in a quick podcast. So oftentimes I write a lot about this. I have a Substack, Shruti Gandhi Substack, that you should subscribe to. But oftentimes what I look for is one, the what I call like the ability to lower execution risk. Because what I do is I look for teams that are solving big problems in big markets. So market, oftentimes we do a lot of um, the venture RFPs, if you call it. Like I put like a call for action in some ways, like I'm looking for these areas to invest in. So in many ways, we've done a lot of work on market and we know what we want to invest in those categories. So market risk is low in some ways. Um, Technical risk is low because we like to invest in technical founders that have shown the ability to build before. Um, and then there is, so that's low team risk. Oftentimes, we like to invest in founding teams that we believe, have worked well, have the ability to build things, but also sell things in the past. They've had experience in the enterprise world before, so they don't have to have a lot of experience. But if you say I've been at a company like Databricks or Data Robot or something like that for a couple of years, and I know these companies like mine have this problem, um, I feel like that's enough experience for you to say like I'm going to go build this company, and for me to believe in your experience there. So team risk is also low in some ways. So the biggest risk is execution risk. Will all of the pieces of the puzzle come together for you to go out execute and grow at a fast pace? I think that's the biggest thing I find to be a problem, where people dream big, but they don't realize how the top companies have grown so fast from 0 to 1 to 10+ journey. I think when you're in the startup, uh, like and about to just start something, it's hard to think that year 4 you're going to still be doing what you're doing right now. And I think oftentimes by year 4, year 5, you should be breaking out and thinking about scale. But oftentimes you're just like, oh, I just started this. Year 4 seems not that far out. But now if you work backwards, IPOs for companies happen anywhere from 9 to 12+ years. Year 4 seems almost halfway there. So if you're trying to get to a certain revenue for IPO, and you need to grow triple plus double, kind of like there's like the standard metrics out there. If you need to grow that much, how could you be year 4, year 5 um, with like no revenue? So I think that's where oftentimes I find a mismatch of expectations, the dreams and the pace.
That makes sense. I guess in a similar vein, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions are about venture capitalism?
I think people assume venture capital money in this market is freely available, so they must just go start a company. I think it's unfair to a lot of people that don't have access to capital. When I started out, I had no access to capital. I'm an immigrant, came to the US 20 years ago, did not have rich friends and uncles who could just say like, I believe in you, let's just give 250K to you. And right, even if I went to some of the best schools, that's not enough. And so what's unfortunate is when you do have access to that capital and you think that validation from investors means your idea is good. That's a common misconception that bypasses people in the early days from doing that work that they need to do before they even start a company. So oftentimes I tell founders you should do the work, research, talk to customers, figure out how much they want to pay. But as soon as they're out there trying to talk to their friends on would you like this idea, there is this FOMO in the market where their friends are like, "Oh my god, you're my friend, you're starting something, let me put some money in you." And so then the work gets stopped in some ways at like the fourth or the fifth call because their friends they're talking to about customer calls and such are saying, I'll invest. And then they're like, oh, I didn't know this could happen. So suddenly they focus on fundraise instead without finishing the research that they need to do to really um, make sure that the idea is solid. And so once they raise the money, that's what happens is then the first couple of years they spend trying to figure out if this is even a good idea. And I think that's a common mistake often early founders, first time founders make.
Thank you so much for that insight. I guess more on the optimistic side, what excites you most about your work?
Look, I think being able to open doors for people who want to dream big, being able to, you know, just kind of support and add whatever value I can um, to people who've not done this before. And someone like me 10 years ago, if I had a few people trying to, just appreciate my approach and kind of take the time to say like this is good but this is not so good and here's what I would do to make it better, I would say that that would have changed the trajectory on my founder startup journey. So I would say that being able to do that, that's why I started my own fund, being able to do that for my own founders. And I can see when they're starting, they have nothing usually when we invest, but by the time they're a series B plus kind of company, they're like, you know, tackling such different set of problems, growing so fast, and I get so excited to be able to be part of that journey. And so in the old school days, they would say like, I'm a kingmaker. I don't want to take that much credit, but I do like to, see that journey from someone that went from nothing to the confidence that they have to just like manage hundreds of people. And yeah, so that's what I love about this, to be able to then years later look back and say, wow, you started from nothing and look what you're solving, some big problems in the market. And I had a small part of it.
That sounds really exciting. You also mentioned earlier that you started as an engineer, and do you think your background in engineering set you up well for work in venture capitalism? Or if you could redo your early education, would you have studied like a different field?
No, I think engineering is the best degree. That is, I, obviously technically really good. If you have any type of engineer, I think like computer science, mechanical, like I think it just is a good technical skill to be able to solve problems. And it gives you the structure to help you think about like when something comes your way that is even undefined, how are you going to go tackle that problem? Because I'll tell you, most of us are very good at, most of the people in your bubble or my bubble and just people we interact with are very good at um, solving problems that are defined. You give a puzzle to someone, you know what direction they need to take it into. But very few people are good at taking a situation, assessing the situation, and figuring out of the 100 problems that need to be solved, which one will they tackle? How do they define that problem? And why is this problem important than many other problems that are out there today? And that's what engineering really helps you give that skill set. And so that's I would not do anything differently. Otherwise, I would um, you know sometimes I also wonder, like, should I have stayed technical and just continued to be in the engineering world? That's a story for another time. But but I love doing what I do as well. So I think it's like a split thinking sometimes of like, do I just, because I love I whenever I do try to do a project where I just kind of like immerse myself into a code and then just kind of disappear for a couple of days. I love that as well. But I think that it has to match my personality. I also love talking to people. I also love, being a venture capitalist. So I think that's where I am today.
So for students who are interested in your field and your trajectory, do you have any recommendations for like courses that students could take or how they could balance courses in like engineering with business?
Um, Honestly, it might be um not so I the lot of the time I spend on in education was not to build technical skills. I felt a smart person can build technical skills beyond a certain point of the basic training at school. Um, so I think, I took very hard classes, undergrad and grad, on like building operating systems, or right, like building a compiler and all these other things. They were great to make me feel instantly satisfied about my technical skills at the time. But the things that I really got value out of were classes where they taught me how to make better decisions, or negotiate better, or have better relationship skills with people. I think those are some of the things that can make or break your career, or how you think about becoming from just being an engineer to a CEO or things like that, or a venture capitalist. Um, you know, I don't know who or where, but hustle is like is a thing you need to somehow grit. Is it some of the things like just street smarts? And I don't know what school can teach you that, but what I did find throughout my experience with all my 3 degrees was I always paired it with a good internship. In fact, I always worked full time during all my full time degrees. So I did everything, and it's a lot of work, and some people might just want to not do that. But that's where I find, if you're able to pair your experience and then apply it at a company, I think you get more out of your degree than just by learning it in a vacuum in a school. So I think that's like a biggest. I'm a big advocate of that. So I've always worked full time at whoever gave me, even if it was free. And I know most people can't afford that free job, and I was lucky to kind of mix it all up. Um, and by the way, I didn't come from any privilege, so I knew that if I took that experience, it would matter 10x more down the road than being able to get paid some thousands of dollars right now. So I think that's where I would say, like, pairing your technical skills with some soft skills that you can learn in school, and then applying them in a actual environment, either by joining a company, starting a company, whatever you think is the right path for you, is all in parallel, really is helpful. And it's draining and you don't have a social life sometimes. So it depends on what you're trying to optimize for, but that's what worked for me.
Thank you for sharing. I guess, what are some of the biggest problems you hope that future companies will be pursuing or trying to tackle?
I've often put out like a call for what I'm looking to invest in. And so I put out on LinkedIn and Twitter, like 11 things I'm looking to invest in right now. And so I've made some investments in that category, but I'm still open to investing in many other tools that I've listed out there. One I guess I'll put out there is um, community management. I've been pretty uh, there's lots of communities that are forming today, technical communities, open source communities, GitHub communities, so on and so forth. And I think they're we've all kind of crossed the whole Dunbar math in some ways. I just don't think it's possible to keep up with people at the right place at the right time. And everything requires a community today. So I feel like we need better tools to help think about how we manage thousands of people in our community and everyone gets the most out of that. Um, so yeah, looking for something in that category.
Sounds like a pretty good idea. Sounds pretty interesting too. Do you have any final advice that you'd like to give students?
Enjoy your time. You're not gonna get the time back. I mean, this is such a cliche advice, but what I mean by that is get as much experience as you can in that time frame. I think it's unfair today. I think most people just focus on degrees, and I think degrees are good for satisfaction, personal satisfaction, and family satisfaction, but experience actually gives you the network to go get a job, full-time job after you graduate, or to give you a better sense of what you want your, to spend your life doing, at least for the next few years. So I think that is how I think about, yeah, think about that. Pair your experience with pair your degrees always with a good experience, even if it's part-time or something like that.
Thank you so much for all the advice and the wonderful answers and for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to see who your other guests are and how I can learn from them.